When my son handed his mother-in-law a $30,000 ring, I smiled, but my heart sank. A mother always knows when something's off, and that day, I felt it deep in my bones. It wasn't about the money. It was the way he looked at her, like a boy trying to earn approval that should have never been hers to give. And the way she took that ring, smiling so wide you'd think she'd won the lottery. No hesitation, no modesty, just greed dressed up in gratitude. Everyone at that table clapped and laughed. But I sat there, hands folded in my lap, pretending not to notice the ache in my chest. Because sometimes, honey, a mother's silence says more than 1,000 words ever could. And sitting there that day, watching my son smile like nothing was wrong, I couldn't help but think back to the day my whole world began and ended all at once. I raised my boy, Daniel, to be generous, thoughtful, and kind. He came into this world on a rainy Sunday morning, crying louder than the thunder outside, and from the first moment I held him, I knew he was my reason to keep going. His daddy, Frank, was a good man, honest, hardworking, the kind of man who fixed what was broken before anyone even asked. But life doesn't always go the way you plan. Frank got sick when Daniel was just 10 years old. Cancer doesn't care how good a man is or how much he's loved. It just takes, and it took him from us, slow and cruel, until one morning Daniel came into my room with tears on his face and said, "Mama, Daddy won't wake up." After that, it was just the two of us, me and my boy, against the world. Those next few years were hard, honey, real hard. There were nights when I'd open the cupboard and all I'd see was half a loaf of bread and some peanut butter, and I'd tell Daniel I wasn't hungry so he could eat. There were winters when I'd wrap him in 3 blankets just to keep him warm because the heat had been cut off again. But no matter what we went without, we never went without love. Every night, I'd tuck him in and tell him, "Baby, life can take almost everything from you, but don't you ever let it take your kindness." And he didn't. Even when kids at school made fun of his worn-out shoes or the hand-me-down backpack that used to be mine, he'd still come home smiling, saying, "It's okay, Mama. They just don't understand." He had a way of forgiving people that amazed me. That boy carried more light inside him than most grown men ever do. When he got older, he started working after school, mowing lawns, washing cars, anything to help. Every time he brought home a few dollars, he'd hand them straight to me. And I'd tell him, "Keep it, baby. Buy yourself something nice." But he'd shake his head and say, "No, Mama, you take it. You always take care of me. Now let me take care of you." By the time he finished college, the first in our family to do it, I thought maybe all those hard years were finally behind us. He got a good job in accounting, bought his first car, and started talking about settling down. I still remember the day he called me and said, "Mama, I think I met someone. Her name was Jenna." He sounded so happy that I smiled before I even asked what she was like. He said she was smart, beautiful, full of energy, someone who made the world feel bigger. And I wanted to believe that for him. After everything he'd been through, he deserved someone who'd love him the way I did, fiercely and without condition. The first time I met Jenna was at a little restaurant downtown. She walked in wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, smelling like roses and money. She had that kind of beauty that turns heads, but it wasn't the beauty that made me uneasy. It was her eyes. They were sharp, calculating, like she was studying me the whole time. Not to know me, but to measure me. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just nervous. Maybe I was reading too much into it. So I smiled, asked her about her family, her job, her hobbies. She told me her mother owned a boutique, her father was semi-retired, and she didn't really work much anymore. When the check came, I reached for it out of habit, But before I could, she said softly, "Oh, Daniel will take care of that. He's very generous." The way she said it, not as a compliment, but as an expectation, made something in me tighten. After that night, I told myself to stay open-minded. Love can make people act funny, and Daniel was in love. That much was clear. He brought her around for holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners. Each time, she'd compliment my cooking, smile for pictures, and call me Mom. But I could tell there was distance behind the sweetness, like she was performing affection instead of feeling it. Her mother, though, now that woman made an entrance. Evelyn was her name. The first time she came to my house, she looked around like she'd stepped into a museum she didn't much care for. Her nails were done, hair perfect, and not a speck of dust dared land on her. She complimented like quaint little home, and I couldn't quite tell if she meant it or not. The kind of woman who could smile while judging you, and you'd almost thank her for it. Still, I was raised to be polite, so I welcomed her, served her coffee, listened as she talked about her travels, her friends, her connections. She spoke like she was the queen, and the rest of us were lucky to be in her court. After Daniel and Jenna got engaged, Evelyn took over the wedding plans before I could even blink. Every decision went through her. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, the cake. When I offered to help, she smiled and said, "Oh, that's sweet, dear, but Daniel and Jenna have a certain vision." A vision, apparently, that cost more than I'd ever seen in one place. I could tell Daniel was overwhelmed, but every time I asked if he was okay, he'd just say, "Mom, it's fine. Evelyn's just helping. She's done this before." He said it like he was trying to convince himself. On the wedding day, I stood there watching him in his suit, so handsome, so grown, and my heart swelled with pride and sadness all at once. It's a strange thing, seeing your baby promise his life to someone else. I wanted to cry, but I didn't want to ruin his pictures. Jenna walked down the aisle looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine, and for a moment, I let myself believe this was the happy ending Daniel deserved. That all those hard nights and empty cupboards had led to this day, my son finally getting his share of joy. But somewhere deep inside, that quiet voice whispered, "Be careful, everything that shines ain't gold." After the wedding, they moved into a new house, big, modern, full of things they didn't need, but couldn't seem to live without. Daniel called often at first, always tired, always distracted. He'd talk about work, about home renovations, about Jenna's latest shopping trips. When I asked if they were saving, he laughed and said, "Mom, we're fine. Jenna's mom helped us out. She says money should be enjoyed, not hoarded." That didn't sit right with me. Money's not about hoarding. It's about being prepared when life turns on you. But I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to sound like the old-fashioned mother who couldn't let go. Months passed. My calls started going unanswered. When I did hear from him, it was quick, distracted, always ending with, "Sorry, Mom, gotta go. Jenna needs me." I tried not to take it personal. Every mother tells herself it's just part of marriage, the shifting tides of love and attention. But deep down, I felt the distance growing, like watching your child drift out to sea and not being able to pull them back. Then came the brunch, the one that changed everything. They invited me to Evelyn's house, a place so big you could get lost in it. Marble floors, gold-trimmed mirrors, chandeliers that could light up half the neighborhood. I brought my famous peach cobbler, even though I knew nobody there would touch it. Evelyn preferred light desserts, whatever that meant. Everyone was dressed like they were going to a gala. Evelyn floated around, greeting people like royalty. And there was Daniel, my sweet boy, sitting by her side, looking proud but nervous. I kissed his cheek, told him how handsome he looked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. After brunch, Evelyn stood up and clinked her glass. She said she had something special to share. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I thought maybe he was surprising Jenna with an anniversary gift. But then he turned toward Evelyn. My heart started to thud. He opened the box, and inside was a diamond ring so big it caught the light like fire. He slipped it into Evelyn's hand and said, "For everything you've done for us, I wanted you to have this, a small token of gratitude." The room gasped. Evelyn pretended to blush, saying, "Oh, Daniel, you shouldn't have." But she didn't hesitate. She slid that ring on her finger like it belonged there. I just sat there, my hands folded tight under the table, feeling a heat rise in my chest. It wasn't jealousy, it was hurt. The kind that twists deep and quiet. Not because of the money, but because my son didn't even notice how wrong it was. To him, it was just a gift. To her, it was a victory. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for a long time. The boy I raised, the one who once gave up his dinner so I could eat, was being slowly taught that love had a price tag. That day stayed with me. I told myself it was just one moment, that maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew. Moments like that don't just appear out of nowhere. They grow from something that's been changing for a while. But after the wedding, things started to change. At first, it was little things. Missed calls, postponed visits, small promises forgotten. He'd always been the kind of son who checked in every evening, even if just to say, "I love you, Mom." But soon those calls came once a week, then once every few weeks, and then, sometimes, not at all. I told myself not to worry. People get busy. Marriage takes time. But you can always tell when someone is drifting. Not because they stop talking, but because when they do, their voice sounds far away. When I finally did see him, he looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. The kind that settles deep in your spirit. His eyes never quite met mine anymore. He'd fidget, checking his phone, laughing at texts he didn't want me to ask about. I tried to make conversation, asking about work, about Jenna, about life. He'd smile, that polite kind of smile that says, "Let's not get into it." And I knew right then, my son was slipping into a world where I no longer fit. Still, I tried to be understanding. A mother's job doesn't stop when her child grows up. It just changes shape. So I baked his favorite pie one Sunday, peach crumble with a butter crust, and took it over as a surprise. Jenna opened the door, eyebrows raised like I'd come uninvited, which technically I had. "Oh," she said, glancing behind her, "you didn't tell me you were coming." "I thought I'd surprise y'all," I said with a smile, holding out the pie. She took it, carefully, as though it might stain her manicure. "Well, that's sweet," she said, "but Daniel's out helping Mom with some errands. You can leave it here if you like." Her tone was polite, but cold, the kind of cold that seeps through even the nicest words. I set the pie on the counter, looking around at the house I barely recognized. Everything was new. Marble counters, glass furniture, even the scent of expensive candles. It was all beautiful, but it didn't feel lived in. It felt like a display, a place built for show, not comfort. When Daniel came by later that evening to drop off my dish, he didn't stay long. He hugged me quickly, said thank you, and hurried back to his car. But soon those calls came once a week, then once every few weeks, and then, sometimes, not at all. I told myself not to worry. People get busy. Marriage takes time. But you can always tell when someone is drifting, not because they stop talking, but because when they do, their voice sounds far away. When I finally did see him, he looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. The kind that settles deep in your spirit. His eyes never quite met mine anymore. He'd fidget, checking his phone, laughing at texts he didn't want me to ask about. I tried to make conversation, asking about work, about Jenna, about life. He'd smile, that polite kind of smile that says, "Let's not get into it." And I knew right then, my son was slipping into a world where I no longer fit. Still, I tried to be understanding. A mother's job doesn't stop when her child grows up. It just changes shape. So I baked his favorite pie one Sunday, peach crumble with a butter crust, and took it over as a surprise. He'd fidget, checking his phone, laughing at texts he didn't want me to ask about. I tried to make conversation, asking about work, about Jenna, about life. He'd smile, that polite kind of smile that says, "Let's not get into it." And I knew right then, my son was slipping into a world where I no longer fit. Still, I tried to be understanding. A mother's job doesn't stop when her child grows up. It just changes shape. So I baked his favorite pie one Sunday, peach crumble with a butter crust, and took it over as a surprise. Jenna opened the door, eyebrows raised like I'd come uninvited. Which, technically, I had. "Oh," she said, glancing behind her. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "I thought I'd surprise y'all," I said with a smile, holding out the pie. She took it, carefully, as though it might stain her manicure. "Well, that's sweet," she said, "but Daniel's out helping Mom with some errands. You can leave it here if you like." Her tone was polite, but cold. The kind of cold that seeps through even the nicest words. I set the pie on the counter, looking around at the house I barely recognized. Everything was new. Marble counters, glass furniture, even the scent of expensive candles. It was all beautiful, but it didn't feel lived in. It felt like a display, a place built for show, not comfort. When Daniel came by later that evening to drop off my dish, he didn't stay long. He hugged me quickly, said thank you, and hurried back to his car. But when I looked out the window as he drove away, I saw the back seat filled with shopping bags, designer names all gleaming in gold. And I couldn't help but wonder if he even realized how much of himself he was giving away. A few weeks later, I got invited to brunch at Evelyn's house, Jenna's mother. She'd been hosting these fancy gatherings, all catered food and sparkling mimosas, and Daniel seemed eager for me to come. Maybe he thought it'd help me feel included. Maybe he just didn't want to argue. When I arrived, I felt like I'd stepped into a magazine. White walls, gold trim, crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where even your footsteps felt out of place. The table was covered with food I couldn't pronounce. People I didn't know smiled with that polite stiffness of those who don't really see you. Daniel came over and kissed my cheek. "Mom, I'm glad you came," he said, though he sounded distracted. I could tell he was nervous about something. The way he kept glancing toward Evelyn. Evelyn, of course, was in her element. Dressed in silk, laughing too loud, making sure everyone noticed her. When she saw me, she gave me that same tight smile she'd worn since the day we met. "Oh, you made it," she said, air kissing my cheek. "We were just saying how lovely it is to have family together." The word family slid off her tongue like something she'd bonnoed. I sat quietly, listening to the conversation swirl around me. Talk of vacations, renovations, and luxury brands. No one mentioned love, or gratitude, or faith. It was a room full of people measuring worth in dollar signs. And right as dessert was served, Evelyn tapped her glass. "Everyone," she said, her smile wide and rehearsed. "My son-in-law has something special to share." Daniel stood up, a bit awkward, a velvet box in his hand. I thought for a moment he was going to surprise Jenna, maybe an anniversary gift, or something sweet. But then he turned toward Evelyn. My heart stopped. He opened the box, and there it was, a diamond ring so bright it caught every eye in the room. It sparkled like ice, cold and perfect. He smiled nervously and said, "For everything you've done for us, Evelyn. For all your help with the house, the wedding, everything. I wanted to give you this. Just a token of appreciation." A hush fell over the table. And then Evelyn gasped. But not the kind of gasp born from surprise. No, this was practiced. "Oh, Daniel, you shouldn't have," she said, even as she held out her hand without hesitation. The diamond slid onto her finger as naturally as if it had always belonged there. The room erupted in polite applause. He smiled nervously and said, "For everything you've done for us, Evelyn. For all your help with the house, the wedding, everything. I wanted to give you this, just a token of appreciation." A hush fell over the table, and then Evelyn gasped, but not the kind of gasp born from surprise. No, this was practiced. "Oh, Daniel, you shouldn't have," she said, even as she held out her hand without hesitation. The diamond slid onto her finger as naturally as if it had always belonged there. The rune erupted in polite applause. Jenna dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, and I just sat there, still, silent, watching it unfold like a slow nightmare. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the ring. It was the meaning behind it. I thought about all the years Daniel had spent working extra shifts just to pay bills. How he'd hand me his last $20 so I could buy groceries. And now here he was, giving away a $30,000 ring, like it was nothing, to a woman who already had everything. I stared at Evelyn, her hand outstretched, the diamond catching light like a trophy. And when her eyes met mine, I saw something flicker there, triumph, like she'd won. After that brunch, things between us were never quite the same. Every time I called, Jenna answered instead of Daniel. If I asked to speak to him, she'd say, "He's busy, I'll tell him you called." But somehow, the message never got through. When I finally managed to reach him at work, I tried to bring up the ring gently. I didn't want to sound bitter. I stared at Evelyn, her hand outstretched, the diamond catching light like a trophy. And when her eyes met mine, I saw something flicker there. Triumph, like she'd won. After that brunch, things between us were never quite the same. Every time I called, Jenna answered instead of Daniel. If I asked to speak to him, she'd say, "He's busy, I'll tell him you called." But somehow, the message never got through. When I finally managed to reach him at work, I tried to bring up the ring gently. I didn't want to sound bitter. "Baby," I said, "that was a mighty generous gift you gave Evelyn. Are you sure that was necessary?" He laughed, a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Mom, don't start, okay? She's done a lot for us. It's just a token." $30,000 is a big token, I said softly. He sighed. "It's fine." Jenna helped pick it out. She wanted to show her mom how much we appreciate her. I could hear the defensiveness in his voice. The same tone he used as a teenager when he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to admit it. So I let it go. Or at least I pretended to. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about that ring. And about how Evelyn had looked at it. Like it wasn't a gift, but payment. A few weeks later, I ran into an old friend of mine, Mabel, at the grocery store. We were catching up when she mentioned she'd seen Evelyn downtown. "Your daughter-in-law's mama?" she asked. She was at the jewelry exchange. Looked like she was selling something fancy. That night, I barely slept. I kept trying to convince myself it couldn't be the same ring. Maybe Evelyn just had one that looked like it. Maybe she was getting it resized. But mothers know. We feel the truth long before we see it. So, the next day, I drove downtown myself. I told the clerk I was looking for a ring that might have been brought in recently. Big diamond, platinum setting, engraved inside with "To Evelyn, with gratitude. D." He looked at me funny. Then he disappeared into the back and came out holding a ring wrapped in tissue paper. Part of me wanted to storm over there, knock on Evelyn's door, and tell her exactly what kind of woman she was. But another part of me knew that wouldn't fix anything, because the real hurt wasn't between me and Evelyn. It was between me and my son. So instead, I took a picture of the pawn shop receipt with the ring's serial number and date of sale. Then I drove home, sat on the porch, and cried quietly for a long time. 2 days later, Daniel came by unannounced. He looked tense, like he had something to get off his chest. "Mom," he said, "Evelyn told me you've been asking around about her jewelry. Please don't do that." I stared at him. So she told you that, huh? She said you went to the pawn shop. I did, I said. And I saw your ring sitting in the back case, with your name engraved in it. He froze. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the $30,000 ring you gave her, I said quietly. She sold it. He shook his head. No, that's not possible. She said she took it in to get it resized. I handed him the photo of the receipt. His face went pale. For a long time, he didn't say anything, just sat there staring at it, his jaw tight, eyes glassy. Finally, he whispered, "Mom, why would she do that?" I didn't answer right away, because I wanted him to sit with the truth, to feel what I'd felt all along. When I finally spoke, my voice came out low and calm. Because, baby, some people don't see love as something to give. They see it as something to take. He leaned back, running a hand over his face. She said she needed money for her business, he murmured. I nodded. I'm sure she had a reason, but that doesn't make it right. He looked at me then, eyes filled with something between anger and shame. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I reached over, took his hand, and said, I know you didn't, because good hearts don't expect bad intentions. He sat quietly for a long time, and I could see the weight of realization settling on him. Not just about Evelyn, but about everything. The distance, the choices, the blindness that love sometimes brings. That night, after he left, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and thought about how love changes people, how it can blind even the kindest souls. And I wondered if maybe this was the moment Daniel would finally open his eyes. Because sometimes it's not the betrayal itself that breaks you. It's realizing that the person you love let it happen and never saw it coming. But looking back now, I realize those cracks had been forming long before that night. I just hadn't wanted to see them. I kept quiet, but I started to notice. At first, it was just the small things, the way she'd sigh when I entered the room, or how her smile would tighten when I spoke. Subtle things, you know, the kind of things polite folks pretend not to see. But after a while, those little sighs became words. I remember one afternoon at their house, Daniel had invited me for dinner. I brought my homemade cobbler, just like he used to love when he was little. Blueberries, sugar crust, a dash of cinnamon. He used to say it tasted like home. Jenna's mother, Lorraine, was already there when I arrived. She was sitting on the couch with her legs crossed, a glass of white wine in her hand, looking like she owned the place. Her perfume hit me before her smile did, sharp, sweet, and overdone. Oh, she said, when she saw me holding the cobbler. Is that store-bought? I smiled politely. No, dear, I made it myself. She tilted her head. How quaint. That word, quaint. The way she said it made me feel like some relic from the past, a museum piece she didn't care to visit. I set the cobbler down on the counter and washed my hands, pretending I hadn't heard her. But inside, I felt something twist, because I could see it, that same dismissive look she gave me. Mirrored right there in Jenna's eyes, it wasn't Daniel's home anymore. Not really. Dinner passed in forced laughter and clinking glasses. Lorraine talked about jewelry, her vacations, her investments. I mostly sat quiet, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate, watching Daniel nod along to her every word. At one point, she turned to me and said, You know, Daniel's such a good man. You must have done something right. Though I suppose he learned refinement later on. She laughed softly, that fake, delicate laugh, and took another sip of wine. I didn't reply. My tongue stayed still, though my heart thumped heavy in my chest. I'd survived harder words, colder winters, lonelier nights. But hearing someone belittle the way I raised my son, that cut deep. After that night, things changed quietly but surely. Lorraine started calling me sweetheart, in that tone women use when they're really saying, "Bless your heart." She made little comments about my modest house, my old-fashioned clothes, even my simple meals. Daniel didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. He was caught in their world now, the shiny one, full of brunches and weekend trips, and people who smiled too wide for the cameras. I told myself it was fine, that it was just me being sensitive. Then as long as he was happy, I could learn to live with it. But mothers know. There's a sound a mother hears when her child's being pulled away. Not by distance, but by influence. It's soft at first, like a thread being tugged loose. But pull long enough, and one day the whole thing unravels. It was around that time I noticed Daniel had a new habit. He never let his phone out of his sight. Not even at dinner. Once, when he stepped away to take a call, I caught a glimpse of a message lighting up his screen. It was from Jenna's mother. "Don't forget about tomorrow. She'll love it." I didn't know what it meant then. But I felt that same cold weight in my chest I'd felt the day he handed her that ring. A week later, I found out. I was at the grocery store, just buying a few things: milk, flour, some apples. I ran into one of Jenna's cousins there, a sweet girl, always polite. We chatted a bit, and then she said, "Oh, I heard about the surprise gift Daniel's getting for Lorraine. She's so lucky." I smiled faintly, pretending I already knew. But inside, I felt the floor tilt. Another gift? After that ring? That night, I sat by my kitchen window with my cup of tea going cold, staring out at the streetlights. The moon hung low, heavy with silence. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that my boy wouldn't be foolish enough to give more to that woman who already had so much. But something in my gut said otherwise. The next time I visited, the house felt different. Colder, emptier somehow. I noticed that the framed photo of Daniel and me, the one from his college graduation, was gone from the mantel. In its place was a photo of Lorraine, holding a glass of champagne, laughing at some party. I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers trembling just slightly. Lorraine came into the room, humming. "Oh, that old picture didn't really match the decor," she said lightly, noticing where my eyes had been. "But don't worry, it's in a safe place." I nodded, because what else could I do? Later that evening, as we all sat in the living room, she looked over at me and said, "You know, Daniel's so thoughtful. Not many men his age understand how to treat women properly. I suppose some lessons can't be learned at home." Jenna giggled softly. Daniel said nothing, and that silence, that awful heavy silence, said everything. I went home that night and cried in the dark, not because of her words, but because I realized my son was drifting so far away that I could no longer reach him. Still, I tried to hold my tongue. I told myself, "May, don't make a fuss. Don't give her the satisfaction." But the day came when silence wasn't enough. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of warm, golden day that makes the air smell like cut grass and second chances. I was in town, running errands, when I saw her. Lorraine. She was walking out of a little pawn shop on Maple Street, the one tucked between the bakery and the old hardware store. I wouldn't have even noticed her if it weren't for the way she held that small white envelope, clutched tight, like it carried the world inside it. She looked smug. There's no other word for it. That same self-satisfied tilt of her chin, those oversized sunglasses hiding eyes that didn't need hiding, because guilt was something she didn't seem to know. I thought maybe she'd sold one of her endless trinkets or handbags. But when she stepped into her car, the sunlight caught on something in her hand, and for the briefest moment, I saw it. The ring. The same ring Daniel had given her. That glittering diamond that had once been a symbol of his generosity, his good heart, was now nothing more than a tool for her greed. I froze right there on the sidewalk, my grocery bag slipping from my hand. Apples rolled across the pavement, one splitting open like my heart did. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the arrogance of it. The way she sold it in broad daylight, in our small town, as if no one would ever find out. As if Daniel's love and trust were things she could trade in for quick cash. I didn't confront her then, not in public, not while she still wore that smirk. I just stood there, watching her drive away, her tires crunching over the very apple she'd made me drop. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from a cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. The house felt emptier than usual, like even the walls were tired of holding in my worry. I replayed it all in my head, the way she'd smiled when Daniel handed her that ring, the way she'd called it a token of appreciation, the way everyone had clapped as if they were in on some cruel joke I wasn't supposed to understand. I thought about calling Daniel right then. But what would I say? Your mother-in-law pawned your gift? Would he even believe me? He'd changed so much, his words sharper, his patience shorter. He used to call me every evening, even if just to say goodnight. Now, days would pass without a word. Still, I knew I had to try. The next morning, I called. He picked up after the fourth ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice tired, distracted. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound steady. "I was just wondering, how's everything going?" "Fine," he replied. A pause. "Why? Did something happen?" I hesitated, then said it. "I saw Lorraine yesterday, at the pawn shop." Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. "So?" he finally said. "I think she sold that ring, Daniel." My voice cracked. "The one you gave her." He sighed, the kind of sigh that feels like a door closing. "Mom, please don't start." "Start what? I'm just—" "She wouldn't do that," he said, cutting me off. "You probably saw something else. You're reading too much into it." My throat tightened. "Daniel, I saw it with my own eyes." He groaned. "Mom, you've been suspicious of her from day one. Jenna and her mother have been nothing but kind to you. Why do you keep trying to find problems?" Kind. That word nearly broke me. Because kindness isn't what I'd seen in Lorraine's eyes that night she mocked my cobbler, or when she replaced my photo with her own. I tried to explain, but he'd already decided what to believe. "Mom," he said softly but firmly, "I love you, but you've got to stop. You're letting your feelings get in the way." He hung up before I could reply. I sat there, phone still in my hand, the dial tone buzzing like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. That was the moment I realized something painful. Love doesn't always protect you from blindness. Sometimes, it makes you see only what you want to. For days, I kept to myself. I stopped calling, stopped visiting. I told myself that if Daniel wanted to learn the truth, he'd have to find it on his own. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. 2 weeks later, I was downtown again, walking past that same pawn shop. I wasn't planning to go in, but something pulled me. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope, maybe that quiet, aching part of me that still believed in my son's goodness. The bell over the door jingled when I stepped inside. The air smelled of metal and dust, the scent of old promises traded for survival. A man behind the counter looked up. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "Afternoon," I replied softly. My eyes wandered over the glass cases filled with watches, bracelets, and rings. So many stories, all sold for less than they were worth. And then I saw it. There, under the glass, resting on a black velvet pad, Daniel's ring. Even under the dim light, it sparkled like it remembered what love used to mean. My hands trembled as I leaned closer. "That ring," I whispered. "Where did it come from?" The man glanced at a receipt book. Came in about 2 weeks ago. Lady named Lorraine Hastings." "You interested in buying it?" I felt my stomach twist. "No," I said softly. Just looking." He smiled politely, not realizing he'd just confirmed what I already knew, that the woman who pretended to care for my son had sold his generosity for pocket change. I thanked him and walked out, my heart pounding like thunder. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the sidewalk. I stopped for a moment, clutching my purse, letting the hurt settle. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Knowing my boy had been fooled, that his good heart had been turned into someone else's payday. When I got home, I sat in my rocking chair and stared at the photo of Daniel as a little boy. Missing front tooth, ice cream on his chin. Smiling like the whole world was still good. I whispered to the picture, "You always had a big heart, baby. But sometimes the world takes advantage of the ones who shine the brightest." That night I didn't cry. I was past tears. What I felt now was colder, steadier. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about truth. And I knew Lorraine's truth would come out soon enough. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still, the kind of stillness that presses on your ears and makes your thoughts louder. I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched the sky shift from blue to gold, knowing what I had to do. For weeks, I'd kept quiet, hoping decency would reveal itself. But some truths need a little help finding the light. I took the small notebook I keep for bills and birthdays and tore out a page. On it, I wrote the name of the pawn shop, the address, the date, and the name Lorraine Hastings. Then I folded it neatly and slipped it into my purse beside Daniel's childhood photo. That afternoon, I drove to Daniel's office. He looked surprised to see me standing at the door. My Sunday dress pressed, my hair pinned back the way his father used to like it. "Mom," he said, "is everything okay?" "Not really," I answered, "but it will be." He hesitated, then waved me in. His office smelled of coffee and cologne, and the faint metallic hum of computers. I sat down across from him, heart steady but heavy. "Daniel," I said, laying the folded paper on his desk, "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you something you need to know." He looked at the paper, confused. "What is this?" "The pawn ticket," I said quietly. "From the ring you gave Lorraine." He frowned, picked it up, read the name. Color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" "I saw her, Daniel. I saw her walk out of that shop. I went in later and saw the ring myself. I didn't want to believe it either, but sometimes believing hurts more than the truth." He sank back in his chair, rubbing his temples. For a long time, he said nothing. The clock ticked, slow and merciless. Finally, he whispered, "I gave that ring to show gratitude. She said it reminded her of her late husband. She said she'd treasure it." I nodded, and she treasured it right up until she found a price tag. He looked up at me then, eyes glossy, the boy I'd raised, peeking through the man he'd become. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured. "I should have listened." I reached across the desk, took his hand. "It's not about me being right. It's about you seeing people for who they are." He nodded slowly. "I need to talk to her." That evening, he did. He invited Lorraine and Jenna over, under the pretense of a quiet dinner. I stayed in the kitchen, silent, pretending to fuss with the dishes, while I listened through the thin wall. Daniel's voice was calm but hard. "Lorraine," he said, "do you still have the ring I gave you?" She laughed lightly. "Of course, dear. It's at the jeweler's being cleaned." Daniel's chair scraped against the floor. "Funny," he said, "because the jeweler's name isn't on this receipt. The pawn shop's is." Silence. The kind that drains the air from a room. Lorraine tried to laugh it off, her tone brittle. "Well, I just needed some cash for a few days. I was going to buy it back." Jenna's voice broke in, sharp, embarrassed. "Mother," Daniel stood up. "You lied. To me. To all of us." Lorraine tried to salvage her dignity. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just a ring." He shook his head. It was never about the ring. I didn't see her face, but I heard the sound of a woman cornered, her voice rising, pride cracking, excuses tumbling, one after another. And then Daniel said the words that made me close my eyes in quiet relief. You will not manipulate my family again. Not my wife, not my mother, no more. The front door opened, then slammed shut. When I walked into the living room, Daniel was standing there, shoulders heavy, but his eyes clear for the first time in months. Jenna sat on the couch, silent, her hands twisting the edge of a napkin. He looked at me. You were right, Mom. I smiled faintly. No, baby, you just finally saw. He took a deep breath. I can't undo what she did, but I can make sure it never happens again. I touched his arm. That's all a mother ever wants. Weeks passed. The house grew warm again. Daniel started visiting on Sundays like he used to. He brought Jenna sometimes, quiet, thoughtful now, her arrogance softened by the shock of truth. Lorraine moved away. Though the gossip lingered longer than she did, people remembered. Small towns always do. One afternoon, Daniel helped me hang a new photo on my wall. One of us standing in the backyard, sunlight spilling through the maple tree. He smiled. I think Dad would have liked this one. I looked at him and saw the man his father and I raised. Older, wiser, maybe a little wounded, but finally his own again. Your father would have been proud, I said. So am I. He hugged me then, long, real, the kind of making years of hurt melt away, and in that quiet moment, I realized something. Love doesn't always protect our children from making mistakes, but if we stay patient long enough, it can help them find their way back home. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I knew what had to come next. Love had done its part. Now it was time for truth to do hers. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't need to. Anger's loud, but truth can whisper and still shake the room. When I asked Daniel to meet me, I chose the same diner where I used to take him after Sunday school. The one with the red vinyl booths and the smell of coffee that never quite leaves your clothes. He used to sit in a window seat, legs too short to reach the floor, drawing faces in the condensation on the glass while I stirred sugar into my cup. Now he was grown, in his pressed shirt and tired eyes, looking at me like he wanted to shrink back into the boy who could be comforted with pie. I laid the pawn receipt on the table between us. No speech, no accusation, just the paper. He stared at it. The air between us went still, like even the clock on the wall was holding its breath. Mom, his voice cracked. Is this? Yes, baby. He traced the handwriting, the date, the numbers that turned love into a transaction. His face went pale, lips tightening as if every memory of that gift was collapsing in on itself. He didn't speak for a long time. Only the clinking of dishes and the low hum of conversation filled the silence. Finally, he whispered, Mom, I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. It was warm, trembling, but warm. Baby, I said softly, love can blind even the kindest eyes, but it doesn't mean you stop seeing the truth. His shoulders sagged, the fight gone. I thought I was doing something good. I thought she appreciated me. She appreciated the shine, not the heart that gave it, I said. There's a difference, Daniel. Some folks see generosity as a doorway. Others see it as a vault they can rob again and again. He nodded, eyes wet. I didn't want to believe what you were telling me before. I thought you were just jealous. That word stung, even now, but I smiled anyway. Jealous? No, baby. A mother doesn't envy the people her child loves. She just prays they love him right. He covered his face for a moment. I could see his jaw tighten, shame fighting with relief. The kind of relief that comes when denial finally gives up. When he looked back at me, I saw the boy he'd been, the one who used to protect stray kittens and cry at sad movies. That softness had been buried under years of trying to please everyone but himself. Mom, he said quietly, how do I fix this? You don't fix a lie by polishing it, baby. You let it crumble, and then you build something honest where it used to stand. He took a deep breath, nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw peace in his face. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind that comes after a long storm, when you finally see the sunlight breaking through. We sat there for a while, talking about nothing and everything. The coffee, the weather, the way life keeps testing your heart. Before he left, he kissed my forehead, the same way his daddy used to, and said, "Thank you, Mom, for never giving up on me." I watched him walk out of that diner, tall but humbled, carrying a lesson no money could buy. That night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace, laced with a little ache. Because even when things start to heal, silence always follows, waiting to see if the change will last. A week passed before I heard from Daniel again. A week of silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the creak of the porch swing that hadn't carried his weight in months. I didn't press. I'd said my piece, and sometimes love has to give space for truth to grow roots. You can't force someone to see what they're not ready to face. Then one evening, as the sun slipped low and the sky burned gold, I saw his car pull up. He sat there for a long moment before getting out. Shoulders heavy, like the world had been sitting on them. When he finally walked up the steps, he looked older. Not by years, but by understanding. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. I just nodded. "Hey, baby, you hungry?" He smiled, a sad little curve of his lips. "Always." So I set a plate down in front of him. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal that's more therapy than food. He didn't touch it right away. He just stared at it, like he was remembering every Sunday dinner we ever had, before things got complicated. "I talked to her," he finally said. His voice was quiet but steady. "I figured you would," I replied, folding my napkin slow. She didn't even deny it at first, just said it was her right. That the ring was hers once I gave it to her, so what she did with it was her business. I let out a breath. "And how'd that sit with you?" He swallowed. "It didn't. Not after what I saw in her eyes when she said it. There was no remorse, Mom. No guilt. Just pride." I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence does more than words ever could. "She said she needed the money," he continued. "Said I was too attached to sentimental things, that I didn't know what real success looked like." He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "Mom, she laughed when I told her how much that ring meant to me. And that's when I saw it, the shift. Not the anger of a wounded ego, but the awakening of a man who'd been living under someone else's idea of love. She called me naive," he said, voice cracking. "Said I was just like you." I smiled softly. "Then I'd call that the finest compliment you could have received." He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "I used to think you and her were just different kinds of strong women, but now I see strength isn't about control, it's about care. You give without keeping score. She takes without remembering where it came from." He pushed the plate away, leaned back and sighed. "I told her I needed space, that I wanted honesty, not performance." "And what did she say?" I asked quietly. "She told me I'd regret it, that I'd come crawling back when I realized I couldn't do better." He gave a small, tired laugh. "Mom, she made it sound like love was a competition." "Some people mistake possession for love," I said. "They don't hold your hand, they hold your leash." He nodded. "Yeah, I see that now." We sat there for a long time, the kind of silence that feels heavy, but healing. I reached out, brushed his hair back like I used to when he was a boy. "You're learning, Daniel, and learning's painful sometimes, but I'm proud of you for facing it." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "You were right all along." I shook my head. "No, baby. I was just waiting for you to see what your own heart already knew." That night, after he went home, I sat by the window with my cup of tea and let the memories roll through me. The years of laughter, of birthdays, of first heartbreaks and second chances. Raising a child teaches you that your love is both the shield and the target. You protect them with everything you've got, even when they're the ones throwing stones. And when they finally come home, not just to your house, but to themselves, all the bruises fade. A few weeks later, Daniel called, said he'd moved into a small apartment across town. Quiet place, simple. No fancy furniture, no pretending. Just space to breathe again. He'd started seeing some of his old friends again. The kind that didn't care about social ladders or how much a dinner bill cost. And he'd started painting again. I could hear the light in his voice when he talked about it, the same light I hadn't heard in years. Then, one afternoon, he came by with something in his hands, a small, square box. "Mom," he said, "I've been saving up." Inside was a ring. Not diamonds this time, not gold, just silver, simple and elegant, with a tiny sapphire in the center. "For you," he said, "not as a gift to repay you, but as a promise. A reminder that not everything precious needs to shine." I didn't even try to stop the tears that came. I just hugged him, hard enough to make up for all the distance between then and now. He whispered, "I love you, Mom." And I told him, that's all the treasure I'll ever need. Time went on. Jenna drifted out of his life the way people who thrive on drama often do. Quietly, once they realize they can't perform for an audience anymore. I heard she moved to another city, chasing the next shiny thing, another stage to play her part on. And Daniel? He rebuilt, slowly, humbly. He started volunteering at a local art center, teaching kids how to paint. Said it reminded him that creation is about giving, not gaining. He met someone new, too, not right away, but when he was ready. Her name was Lily. She wasn't glamorous like Jenna, but she was kind. The kind that doesn't shout about it. The kind that shows up. When I met her, she brought me flowers she'd grown herself. Simple daisies, tied with a piece of string. "Daniel tells me you make the best peach cobbler," she said. "I'd love to learn one day." And right then, I knew. My boy had finally found peace. Time moved gently after that. Days rolled into weeks, and before I knew it, the ache that used to fill the house had been replaced by laughter again. Soft, familiar, real. It's funny how life comes full circle when you least expect it. Sometimes the things that break you become the things that teach you how to stand taller. Months had passed since everything settled, and the seasons began to change again. The air carried that early hint of spring, soft winds that smelled like second chances. I was sitting on the porch one afternoon, rocking in my chair, when I saw Daniel's car pull into the driveway again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Lily was beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. They were smiling, not the kind of forced smiles people wear for photos, but the kind that come from quiet contentment. He helped her out of the car, walked up the steps, and said, "Mom, we have something to tell you." I looked at them, my heart doing that familiar flutter. "Oh Lord," I said, pretending to brace myself. "What is it now?" Lily laughed softly. "We're engaged." For a second, I just stared, and then I felt the tears come, warm and real. Not because I was surprised, but because this time, it felt right. Daniel reached into his pocket and showed me the ring. Simple, gold, and honest. No grand gestures, no borrowed shine, just a promise made from truth. I didn't need $30,000 this time, he said. Just the right heart. I smiled and took his hand in mine. Then you've already found your wealth, baby. That night, after they left, I sat by the window with the lamp glowing low, watching the fireflies blink in the yard. It's strange, I used to think love was something you gave away until there was nothing left. But now I know, real love multiplies. It grows stronger in the spaces where forgiveness lives. I thought about Jenna's mother, that woman who once smiled at me like she'd already won something, and I realized she hadn't. She may have fooled my son for a while, but she never got what she really wanted. Because money fades, jewelry tarnishes, but character, that's the one thing you can't fake. And in the end, my boy saw that for himself. That's the only victory that ever mattered to me. Weeks turned into months, and their wedding came, small, warm, held in the garden behind the little church on Main Street. The sky was bright, the kind of blue that feels like forgiveness itself. I wore a pale lilac dress, one Daniel said reminded him of spring mornings when I used to braid his hair before school. Lily walked down the aisle barefoot, daisies in her hair, carrying nothing but peace. When they said their vows, I could feel the quiet strength in their words. They didn't promise forever. They promised effort, kindness, and truth. And that, I thought, is what makes forever last. After the ceremony, Daniel came to me. "You know, Mom," he said, "I kept that pawn shop receipt." I raised an eyebrow. "Now, why on earth would you keep that?" He smiled. "As a reminder that I once mistook glitter for gold." I chuckled. "Well, maybe one day you'll frame it. Hang it next to a photo of the woman who taught you the difference." He laughed and kissed my forehead. "I already have, Mom. That woman's you." When everyone had gone home and the candles burned low, I stayed behind a while, just sitting there among the petals and half-empty glasses, listening to the night settle in. It's in those quiet moments that truth feels the loudest. Because you start to see how every wound has its purpose, how every tear watered something you couldn't see at the time. If I'd never kept silent that day, if I'd let anger speak louder than patience, maybe Daniel would have turned away for good. But sometimes, love is knowing when not to speak, when to let life be the teacher. And life had done its teaching well. Now, when I think back on it all, the ring, the lies, the heartbreak, I don't feel bitterness anymore, just gratitude, because it reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten, that a mother's job isn't to protect her child from pain forever. It's to make sure they know how to heal from it. And Daniel did. He found his truth, his peace, his person. And I found my joy again, not in being needed, but in being understood. Sometimes that's the sweetest reward of all. A few weeks later, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a note from Daniel. It read, "Mom, I used to think love was what you gave when someone deserved it. But now I know love is what you give because it's who you are. Thank you for showing me that. Your son, Daniel." I sat there for a long time, that note trembling in my hands, because in those words, I saw the full circle. The little boy who once saved up his allowance to buy me a locket. The man who lost his way chasing approval. And the soul who finally came home, not just to his mother, but to himself. So if you ask me what became of that $30,000 ring, I'd say it bought something priceless, not in gold, not in diamonds, but in growth, truth, and grace. Because sometimes, the most expensive lessons come wrapped in the cheapest lies. And the only thing more powerful than heartbreak is a mother's quiet forgiveness. I didn't raise a perfect son. I raised a good man, and in the end, that's worth more than any ring could ever be. I watched him drive away that evening, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in gold. And for the first time in a long time, my heart felt light. Not because everything was perfect, but because we'd both learned something real. Sometimes, the hardest thing a mother can do is stay silent long enough for her child to see the truth. Because love doesn't always mean protecting. Sometimes, it means stepping back and letting life do the teaching. And when the truth finally shows itself, it may break your heart for a moment, but it sets it free forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.